Hi creatives! Today we're going to talk about how to wrap up a branding project with everything from how to present your concepts to a client, export files, create brand guides, and finally how to create a brand handoff package for your clients to get more work and build a great relationship. This is the fifth and last part of this series of me sharing my full branding process, so if you haven't seen the other parts, I'm going to make sure to link them down in the description if you want to watch them first. Last time you saw me create this full brand identity for an urban garden called Rootful, and we created lots of applications like logos, colors, and mockups. And today we're going to put all of that together in a really beautiful brand presentation that we can then share with our clients. I like to use Keynote to prepare my presentations, and that way I can set up a template so it's much quicker every time I need to do a new project. The goal of the concept presentation is to take this concept that you've created in your head and then show that to your clients so they can really understand the vision and how it will be practically applied day to day. Most clients are maybe not super visual people, and that's probably why they hired you as a designer. And so that's why we want to use aids like mockups and different examples in photography and show different brand applications so that we're not just showing a logo in black and white, for example, because that's something that will be really difficult for your client to actually picture how that will work in their day-to-day branding. A common pitfall that a lot of concept presentations have is to not talk about the reasoning and the idea behind the concept. So if we just show the visual, we're not really telling the story of the brand. So here's how I structure my concept presentations to make sure I get this vision across and that I'll be able to get helpful and actionable feedback from my clients. The very first slide I have is just an intro stating what the meeting is and the core purpose of the meeting. And for me, that means picking a direction for the brand. I always present 3 different concepts to my clients, but if you're presenting one concept, your goal might not be to choose a direction. It might be something like revealing the brand identity and making it iterations before we move to launch of the brand. Next, I explain all the different sections that we're going to go through and just tell my client what to expect. I want them to be aware of everything they're going to be seeing and that they'll see lots of different applications. But this is also where I ask them to wait with their feedback until we've shown all the different concepts. It's really difficult to give good feedback before you've seen all the different applications. And if you decide to have feedback after each concept, which definitely is a helpful strategy as well, I've noticed that sometimes those comments are just not as valid after they see the next concept. So let's say you're presenting the 3 different ones and they have lots of comments on each, but actually they notice that the third one is the clear winner. Then you might not really have had to have all those comments on 1 and 2 because they're going to be out anyway. So I like to tell my client that I'm going to present all 3 concepts, and then we can have comments and we can go back and forth and we can have a discussion together about the concepts to see which direction they want to go with. The last section I have before I show my work are a few slides that just recap the project goals and explain what to look out for in a good logo. Design can be so subjective, and we want to set the right tone and make sure that our clients think about their customers rather than their own taste. So now we can dive into presenting each concept. I always start with the core idea behind the concept, and this will set the tone and show my client that I've listened and taking their goals into consideration. Keeping this in mind, we can now start presenting the logo. I usually have 4 different slides for the logo. The first one is just a mark in black on a white background. Next, I show the variations with black and white, and here I can mention if we made any tweaks to make sure that the white version is optically similar to the black on white version. Then I move on to color variations. I then include a slide that shows the dynamic aspects of the brand. For some, it can be a fully dynamic brand where the colors and shapes of the logo change to fit different departments or areas of the business. But for some, it's more about showing the icon and different lockups of the logo. Now that I've covered the logo, I present the colors and the fonts. And here, I think it's really important to explain how they will actually be used. Now that we covered the basics of the visual language, I dive into more in-depth sections like illustrations, photography, social media templates, and any other applications that I think will be really relevant to this brand. If the project includes print, packaging, or maybe a website design, I always try to include at least 1 applications of each of these as well, just to give my client an idea of how this will work day to day. For each application, take some time to find mockups that will really tie in well with your client's business, and that's going to show how the brand practically works much better. When I present multiple concepts, I always make sure that both the sections that I include, but also the exact mockups are the same for each concept, because that's going to make it so much easier for my client to actually compare and look at the visuals that we've created rather than the mockups that we picked. The very last slide is always just the logos of the different concepts, just to kind of jog their memory and give us a place to start the discussion. When I've taken my client through the whole presentation, my first question is always, which direction do you lean towards the most? This will give us a really positive starting point to start having discussions about things that they feel really strongly about, like positive or negative, and it will be really good to start narrowing down which direction we're going overall. We typically go through the presentation back and forth and review all the concepts again and start having those questions and discussions that my client has maybe been writing down during the meeting. If they love everything right away, that's perfect, but don't be afraid to ask if there are any areas that you need to work on, because it's much better to do that now rather than when you've exported everything, created a full brand guide, and then you realize, oh, actually this color doesn't work. So make sure you ask those questions now. If they have multiple people on their team, make sure that you act as the translator if they have different opinions. So let's say one person really likes concept 1 and one person really likes concept 2. Get them to really distill down what they like about those concepts and see if there's any crossover. So maybe you realize that the reason they love concept 1 is just because of the colors, but actually everything else about concept 2 is stronger. So then you can have a discussion about, okay, do we need to keep concept 2 as the main direction, but maybe bring in some color options from option 1. So try to be the translator there and help them verbalize what they're feeling around the design. After the meeting, I upload this concept presentation to my client portal in Trello, and I also send them an email that summarizes all of the different changes that we've decided together that we're going to make to the brand before it's finished. If you have misunderstood anything, your client will catch that right away, and that saves a lot of time for everyone. I personally offer 3 rounds of revisions because I want to give the space for my client to really get the brand that they want, and I make sure I put that space in my budget so I can offer a really great brand experience without having to push them on budget each time. Once your client has approved all the new changes, then it's time to export all the files and create the brand guide. When I export the files, I want to make it really easy for my client to actually use the different files and know what the different files are for. So what does this whole setup actually look like? For my logo files, for example, I start with a folder that's just called logo. Inside that folder, I have 2 more folders, print and digital use. In the print folder, I have a PDF version in CMYK for each color variation, and I also have a JPEG version in CMYK for each color variation. And the last thing I add is an Adobe Illustrator file set up in CMYK with all of the different color variations, one in each artboard. For the digital folder, I do the same thing with PNG and SVG files, and sometimes EPS, in different color variations, and I also include an Adobe Illustrator document in RGB. I also usually make a folder specifically for social media, just to make it really easy for them to not have to second guess which color combination or which icon to use. If I know that the brand will be used at really different scales, like a business card and a giant billboard, for example, I might also create different file sizes so that they have those options. And this is mostly for print, because for digital use, you're not going to need as wide of a scale of different file sizes. To actually create all these files, you can go about it in lots of different ways, but there are 2 ways that I've been doing it. One way is to set up an Illustrator document with as many artboards as you have logo variations, and then export them into the right file formats like JPEG or PNG. Because I provide the Illustrator file anyway, this has been the way that I've done it in a lot of my projects, but there is actually a much faster way that I learned about recently. You actually have an export window in Illustrator where you can just drag in your logo and then choose the file format, and you can also add multiple file sizes. This is super handy when you want to export all the different versions separately, like maybe the icon, the word mark, and the full lockup with the slogan, for example. The only thing here I'm actually not 100% sure of is what the resolution is. My best guess is that it chooses the resolution that my document is set up in, but many times you might want to have a lower resolution rather than, let's say, 300 dpi, especially for digital use. So I would love to hear in the comments if you know what resolution the export window uses. I then do the exact same process for any assets like illustrations, patterns, and icons, and then we upload all the files to a cloud folder that I can share with my clients really easily at a later stage. When my client has actually paid the final invoice, I share this folder through the brand guide with them by clicking share and then setting the share setting to anyone with the link can view. The reason I use these settings is that my client might actually want to share this folder with someone on their team, or a marketing person, a web developer, or someone else who might need access. And in that case, I want them to also be able to access it. So I don't want to share just with the specific emails. I want it to be anyone with a link. But on the other hand, I don't want to set them as an editor, because an editor can delete files. And if you have an external person who comes in for a project and accidentally deletes a lot of files, that could be a lot on your plate to find those files on your hard drives and upload them again. So I just make sure I set this setting to view. Okay, great. So now that we have all these assets to go, I'm going to start creating the brand guide. The goal of the brand guide is both to help show my clients how to use the brand day to day, but also to show the values and anything else around the brand that will be helpful for a third party they might bring in, like a marketer, for example. The sections can vary a little bit depending on the business, but I usually include a couple of pages about the brand values, tone of voice, and the idea behind the brand. Sometimes I work with a copywriter, and then this section on brand tone and messaging might be a lot longer. But if I'm creating it myself, I'm not a copywriter, so I tend to focus on what we've come up with in the brand research and discovery session. After this intro section, I add guidance on how to use each part of the brand. If we just add the colors, for example, but we don't explain which ones are background colors, which ones are used for buttons, and which ones are just part of illustrations, for example, it will become really difficult for anyone besides ourselves to actually use the brand. For logos, it can be a good idea to explain when to use which version, and I like to show examples rather than just explaining through text. You can also include sections on the brand photography style and give examples of attributes to look out for in a branded photo. For example, for the Rootful brand, we might want to focus on photography of gardening in action and the outdoors rather than, let's say, vegetables being photographed in more of a studio environment. And we can also make notes about inclusion and color palettes or anything else that will help us create that cohesive brand identity. The next section is perhaps the most prescriptive, and this is where I include social media templates and any layout formatting for a website, packaging, or print that we might have created. If you have packaging, for example, you usually want to have a template where each flavor or new product has roughly the same layout and placement for the logo and text, but the colors and the graphics might change. If I have the time and the budget, I also like to add a page on aspirational examples. This could be adding the branding to merchandise or storefront, for example, if I know that this is something my client will eventually want to do. This is a great way for you to inspire your client, but it can also be a great way for you to get more work in the future, because you're showing them all these different applications that you're capable of doing that they might actually be interested in. Here's a really neat tip that I started doing recently. Remember how we uploaded all of the brand files to the cloud earlier? Now I can link each of these folders in my brand guide. This way, anyone who needs a certain brand asset, like a logo or a pattern, they can just find the direct link and download them from the brand guide. Lastly, I export the brand guide as a PDF, and now we're going to create the handoff package where all of this is going to go together to wrap up the project. A handoff package is just a really nice way to give your client everything they need from the project, but also to say thank you and encourage them to work with you more in the future. I like to keep it really simple and just include a quick thank you and a personal note about why it was really fun to work on this project together. Then I have links to download the brand guide and the different brand files, and I finally add a link to leave a testimonial on my Google My Business page. This makes it super easy for you to get testimonials, and it also helps improve your SEO. The final section is a list of services that we offer. And if I work with a brand on a very extensive project and there isn't an obvious next step, this might be a list of general services that I offer in case they're interested. If I have something in mind that I think would be a really good fit, let's say we worked on their brand and I know their next step is to focus more on their marketing, but we already designed their templates, I might talk about maybe a newsletter or their email signature or other ways that we can work on maybe a retainer to create assets for them. So this is a really good way to show, hey, I really enjoyed this project, it was a great relationship, I'd love to keep it going, here are some ways that we can keep working together. The very last step is just to send this handoff package to my client and say a big thank you for a nice project. And that's a wrap for this whole series on creating a brand from scratch. I thought it might be really nice to make the next series about how to run your business day to day, like how to get new clients, how to think about finances, and maybe how to set goals for your business. So if you have any thoughts on what kind of videos you would like to see from me, I would love to see those in the comments. If you want to learn more about branding and you really enjoy these deep dives, have a look at this video where I created a brand from scratch for a kids clothing brand. That was a really fun one. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck with your projects and see you next time.